All right. I'm super excited to be here today. If you know me, my friends play this game where it's like take a shot. If Aubrey says diversity, usually takes people 10 minutes to get drunk. So this is my favorite topic. I think I have the absolute best job in the world at the absolute best company in the world. And what I want to talk to you about today is not just tactically the amazing things that our recruiting team and I have done to change what Atlassian looks like, but also the philosophies and the principles that we use to get there, because that's really what will help you. So before I talk about what we've done, I want to talk a little bit about how we approach diversity and inclusion at Atlassian. So the most important principle to me is that we embrace progress over perfection. We think about the little things that each of us can do every day to make our team more inclusive or to encourage greater diversity. The second thing, which I'm contradicting myself a little bit, is that we never think that diversity means just gender, that diversity by definition is intersectional. So I'm a queer Latina woman myself, so I'm highly biased on this topic. But it's important to understand that when you're talking about diversity, you mean the uniqueness that's in every person. That said, I spend a lot of my time thinking about people who are underrepresented, right? So folks who aren't as present in technology as they could be, and how do we create opportunities and pathways for them to build amazing things? So, breaking barriers. What I've found is that everyone already has the skills that they need to create greater diversity at their company. They're just not applying them yet. That's really good. It's like you know the answers. I want to walk through what we did, especially in our graduate recruiting. So this is our recruiting for technical folks. So that's developers, product managers, designers, security, and SRE folks who are coming in at the entry level. Now, I joined Atlassian a little over 2 years ago. And at that time, we were hiring about 10% women into our technical roles globally, which isn't exactly something to write home to mom about, but was also pretty standard for our peers. But we don't like standard, we like excellent. And so we said, why? What is the root cause of why we're not hiring all of the amazing people that we could? And it actually turned out that the answers were pretty simple. And I'm a recovering social scientist, so I dove right into the data. Said, all right, we're going to set goals. We said we want 25% of our entering class to be women this year. And I will note that we are talking about gender because it is the globally consistent demographic that we can collect across our offices. We're based in Sydney and Australia. Their racial history is a little bit different. But what we found is that by tweaking each step of our recruiting process, we were actually able to completely change the composition of the candidates that we were talking to, and then also eventually the outcomes. So for me, my first principle is that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And at Atlassian, we have the opportunity to create a level playing field for everyone. And if we do that, we get diversity on the other end, which is pretty cool. It means that if you're holding yourself to a really high standard, diversity is the outcome of that. So thinking a little bit about a candidate funnel, there's a lot of ways that we meet candidates. But when I wanted to think about the first step of what we're going to do, I actually thought about our marketing teams. A really, really great marketer knows something. If you only put out one message, you're only going to get one type of customer. And so we said, what are we communicating intentionally or by accident? And how does that change who can see themselves at Atlassian? Do we have a representative set of people depicted on the website? Does it truly reflect the diversity of our team? We swapped out the photos on our career website. And that sounds really tiny, but I can tell you as a Latina woman that if I go to a career site and there's only one demographic person on that career site, I'm not going to run an application. And then we looked at our benefits section and we said, wow, happy hours are awesome. But we also offer 401k matching, backup childcare. We really care about work-life balance, and none of that's on the website. And it's amazing if you talk to our awesome recruiters, they will tell you about all of that, but not everyone actually gets the chance to talk to them. And so we decided to take a step back and look at everything that we were doing with our branding. And we said, are we actually conveying what is true about Atlassian? And are we painting a picture where someone, no matter their priorities, their life stage, or who they are, can imagine that they would be successful here? And if we don't check that box, we go back. And so we talked more comprehensively about the benefits and the perks that we offer. We started emphasizing things like collaboration in addition to the awards that we win, because some people like to think about competition and some like collaboration. We were super jazzed about this. And then we redid our job descriptions. A lot of folks have probably seen the research that shows that women on average will apply for a job when they have about 80% of the qualifications. And their male counterparts, that number is 30% of the qualifications. And so we rethought the way that we were writing things. Instead of making this magical unicorn list of someone who doesn't exist, we said, let's make our requirements the basic qualifications that you need when you walk in the door. Surprise us with what else you bring. So we did all of this. We were super excited. We opened up our applications for our intern and graduate roles in Sydney. We're like, we're going to get so many people. We're going to have a great balanced class. And we went and we looked at the data and saw who had applied. And we had 0 female applicants. Shit, what are we going to do? And so we said, okay, well, there's a root cause for this. What is it? And as MC said, I love nothing more than a good research paper. So I spend a lot of my time on Google Scholar, right, reading all these things. You don't have to. And what we dug into and found out was that women actually have a confidence gap. It's shown in those job application rates. So we knew that women had the skills and the abilities, but we went out and talked to university students, started hosting breakfasts, and found out was that they felt like they weren't ready to work at a company like Atlassian. They didn't think that they were qualified, and so they weren't applying. And so what we did is we began hosting teas and breakfasts and actually coaching women, saying, can we see your resume? Actually, candidates like you are very successful all the time. We would really love for you to apply. It's a tiny thing, but it turns out we got a flood of applications from women, which is amazing, right? Just a little push, but the exact same skills and capabilities were there. So again, some people need a little push. Think about your marketing. Are you making sure that everyone's getting the little nudge that they need to come see you, to come join your team? And the sort of second piece that I think a lot of folks who are interested in D&I are aware of are things like bias in the evaluation process, right? Unconscious bias is like a new buzzword in tech. And so the second thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that when someone applied to Atlassian, that everyone was given the most fair evaluation experience possible, or as objective as possible. So there's a few changes that we made to our recruiting process that we think helped us hire the strongest team, but it turns out also the most diverse team. So we implemented something called structured behavioral interviewing, which is a big fancy buzzword that basically means you ask all candidates for the same role, the same questions. Wow, it's not rocket science. But it turns out that that's not something that everybody employs, and it can be really helpful because it makes sure that you're comparing apples to apples instead of apples to potatoes. And when I say behavioral interviewing, we focus on scenarios and situations because research tells us that people's past behavior is the best predictor of their future behavior. Again, not super complicated, but not necessarily obvious either. And we did that structural behavioral interviewing. So things like, how have you solved this type of problem before? And not, what do you like to do on the weekend? Because what we know, research from the financial sector actually showed that for candidates who played the same sport as their interviewers, they were 4 times more likely to be moved forward in the application process. And again, I'm not a developer, but I'm vaguely sure that rowing crew does not help you build software. So again, the way that I think about that is it helps our interviewers get the right information from the candidates so that they can make the right decision. What else did we do? We also rolled out a version of unconscious bias training for our interviewers and hiring managers. Because what we know is that as people, we all have biases, right? That's a fact of the world, and a training won't change that. But what a training can do is heighten people's awareness of their own blind spots. They can heighten the awareness of that and give them a language to think about and discuss it. And that's actually the magical part. Because what I've found doing D&I at Atlassian for the last couple of years is that no giant corporate program is going to make your company inclusive or make your company diverse. It's about each person each day being thoughtful about the way that they show up and how they help their teammates. And those things are what actually creates real change. I'm just here with a little bit of an instruction manual. And so we rolled out unconscious bias training that's specifically focused on actionable strategies that people could take to mitigate their bias. So things like, right before you go into an interview, flip through your mind of people of a variety of demographic groups that are in the type of role that you're interviewing for. Reset your mental model of who looks successful in that role. If you're going into an interview for a junior candidate, do you really need to look at their resume? I interview all of the time, and I never look at a candidate resume. In fact, I rarely know their name before I walk in the room. And the reason is because even having access to someone's resume can create biases across a variety of things. Did they go to Stanford? Did they work at Google? Do they match the demographics of what society tells me someone in that job looks like? And this is really important because, for example, I use the going to Stanford example because I went there. And it turns out that the number one correlate for going to a, quote, elite institution in the US is how much money your parents make, right? It's not about your ability. It's not about your intelligence. And so for us, we coach our interviewers to try to come in as much of a blank slate as possible. So you're open to all of the really interesting things that the candidate's going to bring you and what they can bring to the team. And one of the other big changes that we made is that we removed culture fit as a hiring component. So I have a couple of my teammates in the audience, and they know that I'm like deathly allergic to the concept of culture fit. And it's really important. It's because culture fit is this intractable morass of unconscious bias. Like, right, you're like, not a culture fit. You're like, what do you mean? Well, I don't know, they're just not a culture fit. It's not good enough. So we got rid of it because, again, research suggests that it doesn't help you hire effectively, but it also tends to make you hire homogeneously. So we crafted something that we call values fit. And it's not just a rebranding, although we did rename it, which is helpful. So if you know anything about Atlassian, we talk about our values all the time. And when I was interviewing, I was like, oh yeah, you people, sure, the values. Like everyone has corporate values. I was genuinely freaked out by how often people cite them in their day-to-day decision making. And if you don't know about our values, they're written in a way that kind of hits home. Things like open company, no bullshit is our commitment to transparency and to openness. Don't fuck the customer. Put the customer's needs ahead of the company, and the business will follow. My personal favorite is play as a team. So have fun while you're working, but always be mindful of the way that you're impacting your colleagues. And when we were thinking about what we wanted to interview for, the values seemed really obvious. And so what we did was we built an interview that was agnostic to someone's particular experience. So I'm like, I don't want to give away all my questions. Things like, tell me about a time that you were on a team or in a group and they weren't performing as well as they could have. And we chose questions like that, and we asked people, what did you do to help? Because the people who are the most successful at Atlassians are the ones who do what they can to help. And so we're not evaluating a candidate on whether they've been in a software team before. Maybe it's coaching, their kids' soccer team, or maybe it's organizing the family, or maybe it is running, a 100% dev team. But every single person who walks through our door can answer that question from their real life. And they can bring in unique skills and experiences that we may not even have anticipated that they had. And we use the values fit interview to understand whether someone is going to be an add to our culture. So I totally suggest you do that. Get rid of culture fit, or reframe. Instead of culture fit, think about culture add. What does someone add to the culture of my team? because I'm sure a lot of folks in the room have heard the business case for diversity. You've heard why diversity is great. Scott Page, he has a brand new book about teams, I highly suggest it, talks about the fact that diverse teams are better, right? So when you hire for culture fit, you are hiring for people who solve problems in the same way. You are hamstringing your future innovation. And so for us, looking for values fit or culture add has helped us grow a more diverse and more innovative set of teams. Because what we know is that when people come with a diverse set of experiences, it means they have a diverse toolbox to solve the problems that are in front of them. And so we think that that's a core part of not fucking the customer, because we're going to build great things or help other people build great things. And at the end, right, all of these changes, changing your branding, reach out to candidates, make sure that your evaluation process is objective as possible. None of this is rocket science. And none of it also really sounds like a diversity initiative, right? Like, yeah, you're like, we can do all of those things. So I suggest that you do. But the other piece of the puzzle that I often hear from folks is that they say, well, I don't want to use quotas. I'm worried about, treating people unfairly. And one of the best things about this method for increasing diversity is that you are truly treating everyone the same. So I get a lot of questions about, in the industry about how do we increase diversity? Well, we don't want to lower the bar, right? It's like this common idea. And so responding to that in the way that we built our program at Atlassian, but in the world, is it turns out that when you build these really structured, really high quality evaluation processes, diversity is the natural outcome. Or I guess the catchphrase I say is when you have the highest standards, you achieve diversity. And so I'm incredibly proud of the work we did there. And when I talk about outcomes, so I said after about 2 weeks of our intern hiring that we had no female applicants, which was really terrifying. And we got some eventually. But at the end of the process, a really important thing is that we empowered our hiring managers to make the right decisions for their teams. So while my team certainly that year had a target of 25% female starts, it was not a quota. We actually didn't tell the hiring managers that that was our goal. And that was intentional, because what we wanted was to make sure that the hiring managers hired who they believed to be the best person for their team. And I'm really excited about this, and I was completely shocked. But when the results came back, 57% of our engineering intern class was, first year it was 46%, and this last year, 57% of our entry-level technical folks that came into Atlassian were women, which is better than I thought we'd do. So I've talked about this, but I also tend to know with these talks that folks really love to ask questions. So I planned this, and then I want to give you some time if you have questions for me about what we've done or how we've approached it. I'm also happy to talk about some internal cultural initiatives that we've done, but I scoped this talk to recruiting. So yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, I'm making you work for it. Yeah, I'll repeat it.
I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about overcoming those societal barriers, like you mentioned the lack of confidence or the lack of not feeling like there's a proper technical fit.
Yeah.
Where are your candidates coming in?
Yeah.
How to overcome that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways. So there are little things that you can do in your branding that can help. Oh, yes, sorry. So he was asking, how do you overcome those societal barriers? So things like people who have lack of confidence or people who don't see a technical fit for themselves on the team. Yeah, so for the first piece, there are really easy things that you can do, especially if you're a US-based company. Things like adding an equal opportunity statement to the bottom of your job ads. Like, wow, that's free. And it sounds really silly, but for folks who are underrepresented, they often have a lot of uncertainty about whether the culture is going to be welcoming. And it's a pretty low price thing to do, but it's about signaling, right, that this is something we prioritize. Something that I know some companies also do is they'll put, we encourage candidates from underrepresented groups to apply. And certainly that doesn't mean you don't encourage everyone, right? But they're the folks who need the extra push. And so those can be little ways that you signal to candidates that you would really love to see their application. In terms of the technical fit, that's a really great point, and something that I always tell folks. I know I'm talking about recruiting here, but that the best recruiting and branding that you can do is treating your folks really well. And I will say, as a member of a couple of underrepresented groups, like, we use the Whisper Network. Like, everyone checks your references. So, like, treating people internally really fantastically, they will sing that from the rooftops. When I was interviewing for Atlassian, I totally called, like, all of my second degree, like, connections there, and I was like, so how is it? And so that's something that's been actually really interesting in our recruiting, is as we've really started to invest in inclusion, we've started to get a lot more folks who are approaching us and saying, I heard from someone who heard from someone that they were having a great experience. So that can be really helpful. In terms of technical fit, that's hard. My recommendation is, if there isn't a role for someone in terms of, like, the work that they're doing is not going to be substantive and interesting, I would pass on the candidate. Because I think about it from this lens, is that, yes, I want to increase my diversity numbers, right? Like, that's my OKR for the year, but I would rather miss my number and guarantee that everyone's having an amazing work experience than the other way around. And I think if you keep that principle in mind, it can be helpful, because it's a long-term strategy. But if you do that, you will eventually get diversity, right? Because people will know.
And I was thinking more from, like, they don't feel they're a technical fit, but they're totally a technical fit.
Yeah. So I'm really aggressive with people about that. Like, that's actually, this is my weird thing. Oh, he's saying, well, if they don't feel like they're a technical fit. I think part of that can be in a lot of the branding or the communication you do around talking about growth. Because it turns out when folks think that they're maybe not as qualified, if you really try to build it into your culture and then talk about it, that you're a culture that encourages growing, and sometimes that means failure and making mistakes, it can feel like a safer place for those folks to opt into.
I gather these numbers were about, like, incoming sort of recent graduates.
Yeah.
Oh, is it working? I'm wondering if you've had any luck, success, any ideas for when you're trying to recruit more experienced
Yes.
people. That's kind of the situation that my company is often in, is, well, we just can't find any women that are interested with 20 years experience.
Yes, I mean, so that is really hard. So the stats from Atlassian, overall, 2 years ago, we were bringing in 10% women in our technical roles, and now that number is about 18%, which matches market availability, which is fantastic. At the sort of like director and CTO level, about 5% of engineers are women. So in some sense, like, I am empathetic to the idea that they are harder to find. One of the ways that we've done it is by employing what we call the diverse slate approach, or the Rooney Rule. And so we first implemented that for our board and our executive level hires. And it turns out it's really effective. So if you don't know what the Rooney Rule is, it came from the NFL. But the idea is that for the final slate of candidates, you require a diverse slate of candidates to interview. It does not mean that you hire them. By the way, that's totally legal. But rather that you just make sure that the hiring manager has a broad set of candidates to consider. We've done that for the last 2 years for executive and board level hires. 75% of those hires have been women, and 50% of them have been people of color. And again, really specific with our managers, saying, hire the right person for your team. But it turns out it's way easier to hire someone if you interview them. And we're now actually implementing that for the director level and above. So we're sort of slowly bringing it down the organization. So that can be helpful. I also really suggest that folks get off of LinkedIn. I love it as a verification, but because men and white people, things like that, are much more represented on that platform, you're not always going to get the broadest set of candidates. I personally troll Twitter hashtags. for candidates, which may be weird, and I tweet job ads at them. And but no, really. So that's one of my secrets. Is there was like this really great women of color in tech chat. Like, you can just tweet at me. I'm at AD Blanche. But yeah, so like women of color in tech chat, like I used to follow that every Tuesday and like look at who is participating and like tweet links to our open jobs at them, which is kind of creepy, but it worked. Like people would apply or they'd be like, no, thank you, but I have a friend, which is great. The other thing that I like to do is technical books on Amazon, the book reviews. Women tend to write more than men on average by about 20%, and they're more likely to communicate in forums like that online. So actually, I have looked in the book reviews because no one's going to write a book review about a technical book unless they know what they're talking about. So it's like a good filter for skill. But I find that I tend to find more female candidates in engineering there. It's all my weird sourcing tricks for you. But yeah, the other thing I think is making sure that you have a series of perks and benefits that can speak to people across different parts of their life cycle. So like I mentioned, certainly things like backup childcare are not exclusively attractive to women, but things like that and emphasizing it. And the other thing we try to do across all of our recruiting, but it helps with diversity, is really get to know the candidate and what they care about. I can tell you our recruiters are amazing and they don't really have like a standard pitch. And that's because what people might be excited about at Atlassian is different for everyone. And so taking that personal touch can help, because once you find those candidates, it's also about getting them to accept. Because that's the other thing that I've seen as a challenge, both in the research and working in this field, is that even in situations where underrepresented people get the job offer, they're less likely to take it. Again, because if you're in a pretty good situation, you don't necessarily want to go to a culture that's not going to support you. And so it's important throughout the process to make sure that you're maximizing the chance that someone thinks it's the right opportunity for them at the end. And then networking. Like we just send our folks out and, we do a lot of branding around diversity because we want people to come to us. So whatever ways is authentic for you to say that or to show the little progress that you're making, candidates respond to that.
First of all, this is fantastic. I wonder if you could talk at all about succession planning for diversity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we're an R&D heavy company, which tends to mean software engineering. So we face a lot of the problems she articulated, which is finding candidates, especially as you can imagine. Sydney is amazing, but it has a much smaller tech community than say Silicon Valley. But one of the things we do obviously is a talent review, like most companies, and incorporated in all of that is we talk about the diversity of leadership teams. And just to get at that is it's not necessarily just about gender, but what we try to do is, Atlassian as a company, we look at diversity at the team level. If you want to check that out, it's atlassian.com/diversity on the website. You can check out the distribution and what the average team in each of our departments looks like in addition to our overall stats. But what we try to do is to get our leaders constantly thinking about the diversity of their teams, right? And are you building a team that has the diverse set of identities and skill sets? And so that is sort of a discussion as part of the broader part of our talent review process. And then obviously when we have those senior level roles open up, our team very much prioritizes making sure that we have a diverse set of candidates for those because it's really important to have that. Obviously, this is the entry-level roles, but also beginning to build that in the leadership so that folks can sort of look upward in the organization and see that they have role models. Yeah, so I call it like the sandwich strategy. All of my strategies are named after food.
Hi, I just wanted to know what's the overall average of women in your company?
It's a great answer. So our last diversity report.
Was a question.
Yeah, no, I got it. That was a good question. Okay, I'm going to do this off the top of my head. Our diversity report is online, so someone can check me if I'm wrong. Overall, we are 26.9% women total, although 32% of our hires over the last year were women. I don't remember the percentage of women in leadership, but I do know that of the last 12 months, 36% of our new leaders have identified as women. Within our technical roles, we are at 14.6%. Yes, and the hiring percentage for the last year was 18%. So, yeah. So for me, I also think of, I'm a data nerd, but the good thing is that our hiring percentages are leading our static representation, which means we're really just at the beginning of our journey, but also that there's a lot of progress that we expect to see. And I don't know, I think the coolest thing, having watched a couple of our classes go through, is that as we are very open about the fact that we are investing in this, but we're certainly not perfect, we've started to attract a different type of candidate overall. And I was talking to some of our graduates in our Sydney class, to one of the men who works in that. He was like, "It's so interesting to work in a balanced environment. I just feel like the team works together better." And so I just wanted to share that, because I think it's really cool that this isn't just about sort of benefiting women. It's about building the strongest and best teams for everyone, because I know I personally love it when I'm learning and I'm growing. And for the first time in my life, I'm on a team that's gender balanced, that's racially balanced, and has a lot of age diversity on it. And it is the most stimulating, like, awesome experience of my life. And I just want everyone else to have that as well.
Can you talk about if you have a mentorship program for somebody who is new coming in and doesn't have that self-confidence?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different things. So first, when folks start up at Atlassian, they have a buddy, which is very specifically not meant to be someone necessarily within your field or things like that. So that's sort of like a Atlassian mentor, if you think about it. Everything from, oh, where's the benefits page in Confluence, to like, can I go talk to this leader? All of those little cultural things that, especially if you don't feel as confident, that you have someone to go to answer those things. Additionally, obviously, we always encourage folks, if they're looking for more formal mentorship, to go through their managers to ask for that. And then we also run, my group, we've been piloting over the last couple of years what I'm calling community and mentorship beta tests. So I tend to be a very like agile focused person. I'm like, let's test it and iterate it. But one of the things that we've done is this really amazing peer mentorship initiative called Mentoring Rings. And so we actually adapted it from an employee who brought it over from Microsoft. But what we did is it's 8 to 12, mostly women, although we have some mixed gender groups as well. And they just want to learn and grow, and they're all peers, and there's a more senior facilitator. And so they identify the professional skills that they want to develop as a group, and then they actually are responsible for teaching each other. And what's really cool about that is that they're both learning, but they're also gaining the confidence that they're able to impart wisdom and capability. And so what we see is that the women who have come out of those groups are both have better sense of community and connection, but also that they feel more prepared. We have a more formal leadership and sort of mentorship program for our emerging leaders. So that's a 2-day offsite, in addition to being paired through one of our partners, either with a mentor inside or outside of Atlassian, depending on what they elect. I know I participated in that program. It was fantastic. And then the last sort of little pilot mentorship program that we did was actually specifically focused on female engineers who might be interested in becoming architects. And I talk about our values, and one of our values is be the change you seek. And my favorite thing is when people go do things and then someone asks me if I had something to do with it. I'm like, no, I didn't know about it. So I've nicknamed this project Architect Connect, because it sounds cool. But basically, the men in our architecture group said, we don't have any women in our group, and that's a problem. Like, let's fix that. There's a lot of perspectives we're not getting. And so in Sydney, where is our biggest engineering center, they said, well, what could we do? And so they did a series of what we're calling informal mentoring initiatives. So it started out with architects hosting brown bags for junior, mid-level, and senior female developers. And then after they sort of got questions about what does an architecture career path look like, what do you do all day, how did you get there, what skills do I need, we switched off and started doing 2-on-3s. So 2 architects to about 3 or 4 women, so that they could just develop those relationships, but also ask more specific questions about the career. And then in addition to that, the architects started holding a couple of seats in the architecture review for folks to observe, so that they could understand sort of what that career path would look like. So again, kind of building the environment for people to create those personal connections that can grow into a one-on-one mentoring relationship.
Sorry, you mentioned about the structured behavioral interviewing. So what about on the technical interviewing? Like, would you recommend asking the same technical question? Because there's like a concern of like, oh, what if they put it on
Oh,
Glassdoor and they're prepared
Yes, totally.
for it?
Like monitor the internet so people aren't doing that. I am not the expert at technical interviewing, so don't get me on that. But yeah, it's the same types of questions, right? Are you asking people to solve the same types of problems? And I think rather than asking the same technical question, you should know what you're looking for in the answer, right? So like computer science pop trivia, like not super useful to tell whether someone is going to build amazing software, but rather thinking about how does someone think through solving the problem, right? And so making sure that you're focusing on the aspect of the interview that will actually provide the right kind of data, right? Or the other thing I talk about with I was in an interview debrief, and this was like, I won, was we had an interviewer who was like, yeah, this person solved the problem, but they like did it in a completely different way than I thought they were going to do. So I should like definitely hire them, right? Right? Because you think about it, if you're already on the team, you don't need someone who solves the problem like you. You need someone who's going to help you when you get stuck. And so that to me was kind of a sign that we're teaching our interviewer community how to think correctly about how to build their team. Instead of saying, oh, that was wrong because you did it differently, it was, how interesting. Tell me more about why you made those choices. Yeah, so I can't give you advice about what types of questions you should ask, but definitely make sure that you know what you're looking for, and that it's more about someone's ability to adapt and learn and solve problems than it is knowing any particular data structure.
So I think I heard you say that when you have the highest standards, diversity follows.
Yes.
Can you explain that some more?
Totally. So I'm like about to get into statistics. Who's excited? So let's assume that talent is like normally distributed across people, right? Their potential to do something. Speak English, do math, build software. So it turns out that what research shows us about the way that the tech industry, as an example, historically has hired is that they have been extremely biased. So, right, so they have basically, the way that I think about it is they have a really high false negative rate for people who don't match. So my personal research on unconscious bias showed that in code review, when the same code was reviewed in a yes, we would interview, no, we would not interview decision, women were 1/3 more likely to be rejected when it was the same code. I know, because I put two different names on it. And so, again, that's what I mean, is when we hold ourselves to the highest standards, or when we hold ourselves to the highest standards of objectivity, you stop getting that skew. Research basically shows that because it's also a multi-step system, right, interviewing, that you start to see drop-offs in underrepresented people. And so the idea that I use with our recruiting is that, we know what the candidate pool looks like at the top of the funnel, and we want to keep the same distribution all the way down the funnel. And that will tell us that we're interviewing correctly. Right, so that gender or race or age or height or disability status or veteran status shouldn't in any way meaningful way correlate with whether someone is successful in a position. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. It's like flipping the script on it, right? Or I guess the concept that's related to that in tech is tech often talks about the fact that they're a meritocracy. Like, that's objectively not true. But I think it's a really useful concept if you reframe it, which is that no meritocracy was ever built without effort. And it is our goal, create the most equitable and fair and objective processes in company that we can. And if you do that, diversity will be the outcome of all of that effort and work. Yeah.
So what you say depends on so your initial assumption is that talent, problem solving, etc., is equally spread.
Yeah.
So we have to start with the assumption that cultural biases and biases that come from school have not skewed the population so much so that engineering skills are concentrated more.
Oh,
among
yes,
males
that's
or something
absolutely
like,
true.
Something like that.
Totally. So
But you're
saying that the data suggests that that's already happened, that
Yes,
skills
so-
have spread across the genders?
Well, yes. So what I'm saying is that the potential for skill in any particular thing is distributed normally across all demographics. But you're certainly right that there are skews. But the data also suggests that that the distribution, the tech industry in and of itself, is actually not even taking advantage of the talent that already exists. Yeah. So in 1985, 35% of CS degrees were given to women. That number is now 18%. But what you see, or for example, about depending on the estimates, 11 to 18% of computer science degrees in the United States are given to Black and Hispanic students, and yet most tech companies are 2 to 5% Black and Hispanic total, and that takes into account non-technical roles and things like that. So yeah, so that's kind of what I mean, is that even controlling for looking at what the market looks like today, most tech companies aren't accessing all the talent they have access to, which is great, because it's a solvable problem. The people already exist. And then the next step is investing to make sure that you're growing that pipeline over time as well. Yeah, of course. All right, I think we have time for one more. Yeah.
What kind of things is Atlassian doing to retain more female engineers and to make sure that they're having an equal opportunity for promotion and things? We're finding often that we're seeing that women are leaving to take on more senior roles in other companies, and like we would have promoted them too, but they just left, and there was never a conversation there. I'm wondering if you've seen this and what kind of things you've done to help kind of mitigate that.
Yeah, so looking at external research, one of the reasons that women leave tech and people of color leave tech disproportionately is for two reasons. One, lack of career progression, or mistreatment. And so mistreatment's really easy, just enforce really high standards on people's behavior. But career development is really important, and it also doesn't feel like a D&I thing. So we talk a lot about growth at Atlassian, and also really try to explain to people that growth comes through more than promotions. We're a growth company right now, right? We're growing a ton, so your job gets bigger even if you go nowhere. I can speak from experience. But so that's one thing, is that we really encourage people to think about their growth and what makes sense for them, and what do new opportunities look like, whether or not that comes with a role or a title change, right? So people feel like they're moving. And I found that that's actually been one of the biggest drivers of retention. Which again doesn't feel like a D&I thing. From the work that I've done, what I've really seen is that a lot of times women are less likely to raise their hand and say, like, I want a promotion or something, right? It's not that they're not capable, it's not that they don't want it, but they're less likely to talk about it. And so the other thing is we just tell people it's okay, or we set up the expectation that you should be articulating to your manager what growth you want, or that you want to grow, and then you should be working together to figure out what that growth looks like. So talking about some of the mentoring programs we've done, I think has also helped. And I think the other thing, which people may or may not think is a big deal, is our leaders are very, very aligned and open about how much they care about people feeling like they belong at Atlassian. And that's a big concept that my team talks about, is how do we make sure people feel like they belong on their team? They feel like they're growing and they feel like they belong, they're going to stay. And so for our leaders, I think the other thing is that they are really serious about saying it, because that also makes people feel like they want to stay. Because they have someone, like, I consider my biggest allies and advocates at Atlassian Mike and Scott. Both because they talk about it, but also because they totally back me up and are totally there to support all of my work. And so I think creating that, whether it's your direct manager or whether it's a CEO of the company, knowing not just that you should be telling women to grow and do all that, but we should also be giving folks resources about how they can be allies and how they can create that sense of belonging for their teammates. That's actually what drives retention. It's not that I don't love women tech happy hours. I do. But it's really those like day-to-day interactions that really change people's experiences and will cause them to stay or leave.
Do you have any way that you build these kind of soft skills and values into your performance system and the OKRs for managers, to say that besides just getting your project out the door, if you develop people, we're looking at that and reward you for that?
Yeah, that's actually, so my colleague who does all of our performance development stuff is the expert on those topics. Yes, that is something we do. Is so all roles come with both your technical competencies as well as your behavioral expectations. So for leaders, that includes things like mentoring, right, and influence. And so people are held accountable by that, by sort of matching their behavior and their outcomes to what the competencies of the role require. Yeah. And one more, she had a question. Oh, cool. Okay, got your question.
It was interesting. You said you sometimes don't look at resumes.
Yeah.
I try and if I get a pile of resumes, I try. My eyesight's not that great, which is a kind of blessing in the sense I put my hand over the name and read it first. But do you have any advice about like getting resumes or how to look at resumes?
Yeah, like cut names off of resumes if you can. There's some amazing technology that does that for you if you're in the mood. I don't tend to do like role specific interviewing, so I literally like walk in blind. I'm like, I've got my 10 questions. I'm gonna sit down and do it. I think there's that. I think also, right, we can't make ourselves unbiased. Like your brain will be biased, but if you're more thoughtful about how you're judging people, the number one thing that I suggest people do is write down the criteria and a scoring system before you ever look at the resumes. There's really great research. It's by Ullman and Cohen from 2002, if you want to read it. But they show that in our brains, we tend to match the qualifications that we, quote, want based on what qualifications the stereotypical people for the job have. And so literally just writing yourself a checklist and like a priority order can be amazing, because it means that you're just making the decisions you already intended to make, but you're not letting your brain get in the way. So I think that can be really powerful. I would also really, really encourage you to think about using really specific qualifications. So don't look at whether someone went to Stanford. Again, self-deprecating example, because there are a lot more smart people who didn't go to Stanford than did. Like that's just how numbers work. And so think about that. Don't use proxies for what you're looking for. Or don't use startup experience preferred. Use ability to manage multiple stakeholders and competing deadlines in like a fast-paced collaborative environment, right? Because not everyone has the ability to be in a startup, but there's a lot of people who have managed a huge family and all of those schedules, right? And it's actually the same skill set. And so think about that. Be really specific about what you're looking for, and then keep yourself honest. MC's in charge of the time. So.
Thank you, Aubrey.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, everyone.